It all started during what was supposed to be a nice, relaxing family vacation. My in-laws, my husband's parents, told me I should sit at a separate table from everyone else. Not once during the whole trip did anyone say a single word to me. I finally asked my husband what was going on, and all he did was shrug and say, "That's just how they are." I smiled and said, "All right then, I've got my own way of doing things too." They had no idea what that meant. But the next morning, when they figured out what I'd done, it hit them like a freight train, and the panic started to set in. Thinking back, I guess the warning signs were always there. The snide little comments, the cold stares, the way I was always treated like some afterthought in my own marriage. But I let it slide over and over because I loved my husband, Ethan. I truly believed that if I just kept putting in the effort, if I stayed patient and kind, things would turn around. But they never did. Instead, I ended up on this so-called family vacation that was meant to be fun and stress-free, Hilton Head, South Carolina. Only it turned into something else entirely. Something I'll carry with me forever. We had just gotten to the resort. It was beautiful, like something straight out of a fancy travel magazine. Pristine white sand, swaying palm trees, and the ocean waves crashing softly in the distance. For a moment, I actually felt excited. I thought just maybe this time would be different. I hoped Gerald and Diane, my in-laws, might finally treat me like family. That we'd eat meals together, maybe laugh a little, build some kind of connection. Couldn't have been more wrong. That first night, we all went out to a nice restaurant for dinner. The waiter led us to this long, elegant table, perfectly set for our group. I was just about to sit down next to Ethan when Gerald suddenly piped up. "There's been a mistake," he said, shaking his head. "She'll need her own table." I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. "Excuse me?" I asked. Diane didn't even bother looking up from her menu. "It's just how we do things," she muttered. I turned to Ethan, waiting for him to say something, anything, to stand up for me, to remind them that I was his wife, not some stranger tagging along. But all he did was sigh and shrug. "It's just their way," he said, barely looking at me. So that's how it went. I sat at my own table, all alone. I should have walked out right then. But I didn't. I stayed. I convinced myself it was just some strange, one-off tradition. But it wasn't. The next morning, I got up early, thinking we'd all go down to breakfast together. I headed to the hotel restaurant, expecting to see them waiting. They weren't there. I texted Ethan. No reply. I wandered around for nearly 30 minutes before I finally found them. Already seated at a big table, halfway through their meal, laughing and chatting like everything was fine. Like I didn't even exist. I walked up, confused and a little hurt. "Why didn't you tell me you were heading down?" I asked. Gerald barely glanced at me. "We figured you'd figure it out," he said. Diane calmly sipped her coffee. "It's just how we do things." I looked over at Ethan. He was already eating, like nothing about this was strange or cruel. And that's when it finally clicked. I wasn't part of this family. I never had been. And Ethan? He wasn't standing beside me. Not really. The rest of the trip went downhill from there. Every single meal I sat by myself. Every activity they planned I found out about after the fact, if I found out at all. They went on a private boat tour. I only knew because I saw their smiling faces in Instagram photos later. They had a fancy wine tasting. I found out when I saw them, dressed to the nines, walking through the lobby on their way out. I asked Ethan about it that night. "You could have texted me?" I said, trying not to let my voice shake. Again, he just sighed, like I was being difficult. "It's just their way," he repeated. That was all he ever said, over and over. By the fourth day, I gave up. I stopped trying. I stopped asking. They wanted me invisible? Fine. They were about to get exactly that. Only it wasn't going to be how they imagined. Because I had a way of doing things too. That night, while they were out drinking and toasting their picture-perfect family vacation, I quietly went back to our hotel room and got to work. I wasn't just sitting at a different table anymore. I was about to disappear completely and leave a mess behind for them to deal with. I opened my email, pulled up all the reservation confirmations, and started clicking. You see, I had booked everything. The hotel, reserved under my name. The rental car? Paid for with my credit card. Dinner reservations? All under my account. Even that spa day Diane had been gushing about for weeks? Yeah, I booked that too. And one by one, I canceled everything. Their rooms? Gone. Rental car? Canceled. That fancy waterfront dinner they were all excited about? Wiped off the schedule. I even called the spa and, as politely as I could, let them know Diane would no longer be attending her appointment. Once I was done, I packed my bags, took the rental car, and hit the road. While they were clinking glasses and patting themselves on the back, I was already halfway to Charleston. I booked myself a gorgeous suite, ordered some room service, and sat out on the balcony, watching the ocean roll in, finally breathing easy for the first time in days. Back in Hilton Head, though? Oh, they were in for a surprise. I could only imagine the chaos about to unfold. I woke up in Charleston the next morning feeling more refreshed than I had the entire trip. The ocean breeze drifted through my window as I sipped my coffee and stretched out on a lounge chair, letting the sound of the waves wash over me. And then my phone started buzzing. Ethan. I let it ring. Then Diane. Then Ethan again. Then Gerald. I flipped the phone to silent and smiled. They'd finally noticed. I pictured it all happening in real time. Gerald, grumpy and half asleep, opening the door to find the hotel manager standing there. Sir, we seem to have an issue with your reservation. Diane, mid-stretch, reaching for her phone only to find a bunch of emails telling her everything was canceled. Ethan, rubbing his head, listening to his mom go from annoyed to full-on meltdown mode. No rooms, no car, no plans. I sipped my coffee and smiled. A few hours later, once the silence got boring, I checked my messages. Ethan, where are you? Ethan, what the hell is going on? Ethan, you need to fix this. Now. So I answered the next call just for the fun of it. Where are you? Ethan barked as soon as I picked up. Charleston, I replied. There was a pause. Charleston? What the hell are you doing there? Enjoying my vacation, I said, and then silence. Pure, beautiful silence. I could hear Diane shouting in the background, arguing with the hotel staff. Gerald was cursing under his breath. And me? I just leaned back in my chair, took another sip of coffee, and smiled. You canceled everything? Ethan finally asked, his voice quieter now, like he still couldn't quite wrap his head around it. Yep, I said without missing a beat. He sucked in a sharp breath, the kind people take when reality starts sinking in. Do you have any idea what you've done? He asked, his voice rising. My parents have nowhere to stay. We had plans. You left us stranded. Oh no, I said, dragging out the words with a voice thick in mock concern. That must be so uncomfortable. He didn't say anything after that. I could tell it hit him. I had thrown his own line right back in his face. I went on. You all wanted me separate, right? You wanted me out of the way. So, I gave you exactly what you asked for. This is insane, he snapped. You need to come back. I actually laughed. A real one. No, Ethan. I really don't. Then I hung up. Later, I found out just how sideways things had gone for them after I left. Since the resort was fully booked, they had to scramble like chickens without heads to find somewhere. Anywhere they could stay. They ended up stuck in this grimy little roadside motel about 20 minutes away from the beach. The kind of place with buzzing lights, questionable stains, and that weird smell no one can place but everyone knows. And with no rental car, they were forced to Uber everywhere. Problem was, Hilton Head isn't exactly crawling with rideshare drivers. Between the shortage and surge pricing, they got slammed. That waterfront dinner Gerald had been bragging about nonstop, fully booked by the time they called. They had to settle for some dingy tourist trap, complete with overcooked seafood and a pack of loud kids throwing fries at each other. Diane, of course, lost her mind at the spa when she showed up to find her precious reservation canceled. She threw a full-blown tantrum and demanded they fit her in anyway. Spoiler, they didn't. How do I know all this? From the angry flood of texts Ethan sent me later. Ethan, you seriously just left us like this? Ethan, Mom is furious. She was humiliated at the spa. Ethan, Dad's losing it over the restaurant. Ethan, I hope you're happy. And you know what? At first, I thought that'd be the end of it. Just a bit of well-earned payback. But then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed again. Only this time it wasn't Ethan. It was Claire, his cousin. Claire. Hey, just wanted to say, I heard what happened. And honestly, good for you. I blinked, rereading it a few times. Claire and I had always been friendly, but we weren't close. We didn't text. She wasn't someone I ever confided in. Me, wait, what do you mean? Her reply hit me like a sucker punch. Claire. They did the same thing to Ethan's ex-wife. I sat straight up, heart thudding in my chest. Ethan's ex-wife? He'd always told me that first marriage just didn't work out. Said they grew apart. No drama. Just one of those things. And I believed him. Me, what are you talking about? Claire. They took a trip together. Same setup. Treated her like crap the whole time. Separate table. Ignored her. Acted like she didn't exist. She left halfway through. Filed for divorce a month later. I felt cold all over. Claire. I didn't say anything before because I figured you knew. But seeing what they did to you, I realized he never told you. Did he? No, he hadn't. And if he had, I would have never agreed to this trip. I would have known this wasn't just some quirky family tradition. This was a pattern. And Ethan? He had seen it happen before. He knew exactly how this would play out, and he let it happen anyway. That night, Ethan called again. I answered. I need you to fix this, he said immediately. His voice was tight, on edge. You don't understand, my parents. No. I cut him off. I understand perfectly. This wasn't about traditions or culture or family habits. This was about power, about control. And he knew. He knew what they were doing. You let this happen to me. Silence. Then finally, a soft. Who told you that? Bingo. I let out a short laugh. So it's true. I wasn't the first. Another long pause. Then Ethan sighed. Look. My parents can be a little difficult sometimes. But they mean well. Ethan, I interrupted. They don't even see me as part of the family. He hesitated. And right there, in that hesitation, I got my answer. He wasn't gonna fight for me. He never had. Come back, he said instead. Let's fix this. I looked out at the ocean, at the moonlight dancing on the waves like it was all putting on a show just for me. No, I said, voice steady and sure. I think I've already fixed it. Then I hung up. Afterward, I just sat there, holding my phone, letting the quiet fill the space around me. My thoughts were racing. Ethan knew. He'd lived this story before, and still he let me walk headfirst into it. At that point, I wasn't even angry. I was done. I poured myself a drink, sank back into the lounge chair, and tried to enjoy what was left of my peaceful night. But something kept tugging at me. If he lied about his ex-wife, what else had he kept from me? I grabbed my phone and opened Facebook. Typed in her name, Megan. Ethan's ex-wife. I'd never thought to look her up before. Now I needed answers. Her profile was private, but as I scrolled through the list of mutual friends, one name popped up. Jenna. Her sister. Jenna had public posts. I clicked on one from about 2 years ago, right after the divorce. Never let a man's family destroy you. Never let them convince you you're less than you are. My sister deserved better. We all tried to warn her. Never again. My stomach turned. I kept scrolling and found a comment from, of all people, Claire, the same cousin who had messaged me earlier. I wish she had listened to us. At least she's free now. Listen to them? My head was spinning. I didn't know what to do. I could message Jenna, ask her what really went down. But was I ready to hear it? I stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing out a message. Me, hey, this is going to sound random, but I think we need to talk. She replied within minutes. Jenna, I was wondering when you'd reach out. That one sentence hit like a freight train. Me. So, you know who I am? Jenna. Yeah, we've been waiting for this to happen. I just stared at the screen, fingers frozen above the keys. Me we? What do you mean? Jenna, Megan wasn't the first. And she sure as hell wasn't the last. My breath caught in my throat. Me, what are you saying? Jenna. I'm saying Ethan has done this before. More than once. His parents have too. And if you're messaging me right now, I'm guessing you just went through it yourself. I felt sick. It wasn't just a weird family quirk. It was a ritual. A sick little game they played on every woman he brought into their world. They didn't see us as partners or people. We were just obstacles. And Ethan? He let it happen. Every single time. Me. Why didn't anyone tell me? Jenna, we tried. But Ethan always makes sure his girlfriends stay isolated. He tells them the family just has quirks. He keeps you from asking questions. Did he ever tell you Megan was the problem? I closed my eyes. Yes, he had. He told me she was difficult, that she just didn't get his family, that she made a fuss over small things and blew them out of proportion. But now I saw it for what it really was. He hadn't warned me. He'd groomed me for it. Megan hadn't been overdramatic. She hadn't been sensitive or difficult. She'd been trapped, just like I had been. Well, until now. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. The weight of it all sat heavy in my chest. Years of my life poured into a man who never deserved any of it. But that wasn't the only thing eating at me. Something else was off. Something I couldn't quite shake. Why had Ethan been blowing up my phone all day? Why was he that desperate? Then, at 6 in the morning, I got my answer. A text popped up from a number I didn't recognize. Ma'am, this is Officer Hayes with the Hilton Head Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding a missing persons report filed by your husband. I sat up so fast I nearly knocked my phone off the nightstand. Missing persons report? I immediately called the number back, hands shaking. The second the officer answered, I blurted out, I'm fine. I'm not missing. There was a pause. Then he asked, Ma'am, are you saying you left voluntarily? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course I left on purpose. My husband knows exactly where I am. He's been calling me nonstop. Another pause. Then a tired sigh on the other end. Your husband reported that you left without explanation and haven't returned his calls. He said he was concerned for your safety. I clenched my jaw until it ached. This wasn't worry. This was manipulation. Ethan wasn't scared something had happened to me. He was pissed that I wasn't doing what he wanted, that I'd walked away. This was about control, not care. I took a deep breath and said, Officer, I'm perfectly fine. I'm in Charleston. I left Hilton Head by choice, and I do not want my husband contacting me again. There was a beat of silence. Would you like to file a formal request for no further contact? I hesitated for a moment, then exhaled slowly. Yes, I would. And just like that, I put the first official nail in the coffin of my marriage. Not even an hour later, another message came through, this time from Diane. Diane, I cannot believe you would humiliate us like this. I laughed out loud, ignored it. Then came another. Diane, you made Ethan involve the police? Do you have any idea how this looks? Oh, I made Ethan involve the police? I rolled my eyes and took another sip of coffee. The texts just kept coming, one after another like a never-ending stream of guilt and gaslighting. Diane, this family has done nothing but try to welcome you. Diane, you're being incredibly selfish. Diane, you need to come back and fix this. And then came the final one that made my blood run cold. Diane, if you don't come back, Ethan is going to make things very difficult for you. I froze reading it again and again. It wasn't veiled. It wasn't subtle. That was a threat. Up until now, I thought this was just about power plays and family dysfunction. But in that moment, I realized it was something far darker. They weren't just trying to isolate me. They were trying to break me. And if I didn't fight back, Ethan was going to make damn sure they succeeded. I sat there, staring at that last message. That wasn't a warning, it was a promise. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just some toxic dynamic. This was war. They expected me to fold, to crawl back, tail between my legs. But not this time. I cracked my knuckles, took a breath, and typed out one message. Me perfect. Let's make things difficult, then. And then, I booked a hotel conference room in Charleston. Sent invites to Ethan, his parents, and Claire. If they wanted a showdown, I was going to give them front row seats. The next morning, I sat at the head of a long wooden table. Just me, a pitcher of water, and enough tension to cut through steel. I didn't have to wait long. The door slammed open, and Ethan stormed in first. His jaw was so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. His parents followed close behind. Diane's heels clicking like gunshots, Gerald already red in the face. Then Claire slipped in, arms crossed, a cautious look on her face. She gave me a little nod. I had no clue if she was there to support me, play peacemaker, or just watch it all go down. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Glad you could all make it." Ethan didn't even sit. "What the hell is this?" he barked. I smiled. Slow, calm. "A conversation. You've been so eager to talk, so let's talk." Gerald scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, cool as ice. "I think it's pathetic. I think your family plays twisted little games with the women you claim to love. And for once, you picked the wrong woman." Diane's eyes narrowed. "You abandoned us." I actually laughed. "Oh, I abandoned you? That's rich. Coming from the people who spent an entire vacation pretending I didn't exist." Ethan exhaled sharply and gripped the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." That was it. I slammed both hands on the table hard and Diane jumped. "I am your wife," I said, my voice low and sharp enough to slice through the room. "Not a stranger. Not some outsider you can cast off like nothing. I am your wife, and you let them treat me like trash." Then I turned to Ethan and jabbed a finger right at him. "And you knew. You knew this wasn't the first time. You knew what they were doing, and you let it happen anyway." His face drained of color. Diane tried to jump in, voice high and shrill. "We were just following tradition." "Bullshit," I snapped. "This isn't tradition. It's control. It's a test. And you fail every single woman who walks into this family." Ethan shook his head, clinging to denial. "You're overreacting." Without saying a word, I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the messages from Jenna. I slid it across the table toward him. "Read it." He hesitated. I said, "Read it." Ethan picked up the phone and started scrolling. I watched the change in his face. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. His shoulders went stiff. Then he tossed the phone down like it had burned his hands. "This isn't proof of anything," he muttered. Gerald crossed his arms tighter. "You're just digging up old stories." "It has nothing to do with us," Gerald muttered, trying to wave the whole thing off like he wasn't sitting in the middle of it. I turned and looked Diane dead in the eyes. "Is that right? Because last night, you sent me a message that sure didn't feel neutral." Her mouth clamped shut like a steel trap. "You told me," I said, my voice low and steady, "that if I didn't come back, Ethan was going to make things difficult for me." From across the table, Claire let out a soft whistle. "Wow," she muttered. Ethan's head snapped toward his mother, his eyes narrowing fast. "You said what?" Diane straightened in her chair, face stiff. "I was just trying to make her understand." "Understand what exactly?" Ethan's voice was rising now. "That this is normal? That you've been playing these messed up games for years? That you did the same thing to Megan?" Gerald shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated with the table like it might have the answers written on it. Diane threw him a sharp look, but the damage was already done. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Jesus Christ." And right then I saw it. The crack. The tiny split in the armor he'd built to defend his parents. The flicker of something new in his eyes, doubt. Like maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to question the story he'd been fed his whole life. For the first time since this mess began, he looked at me like he wasn't so sure anymore. Like he was seeing me, and them with fresh eyes. I didn't say a word. I just waited, quietly, waited to see if this was the moment he'd finally say something that mattered. Something real. Instead, he ran his hands through his hair and sighed. "I can fix this," he said, like it was a reflex, And just like that, my stomach dropped. That was his instinct. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Not even regret. Just damage control. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and looked him square in the eye. "You really don't get it, do you?" Silence stretched across the room like a rubber band, pulled tight. Then I stood, grabbing my bag and adjusting it over my shoulder. "I'm not coming back, Ethan." That pulled him out of his fog. "Wait, what?" His voice cracked a little. "I'm done." His eyes went wide, like I just said something he couldn't believe. Claire snorted. "Dude, how have you not figured that out by now?" Diane's voice shot up, shrill and offended. "This is ridiculous. You're going to throw away your marriage over a misunderstanding." I shook my head slowly.
No, Diane.
"You threw it away. You, Gerald, your twisted little idea of how to treat people. You broke this long before I walked out. And Ethan," I glanced at him. He was just too spineless to stop it. Ethan reached toward me, maybe trying to grab my arm, maybe just reaching for something to hold on to. I stepped back.
No, Ethan.
He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You talk. That's what you do. You make excuses. You let them lead you around like a puppet. But me, I'm done listening." I pulled out my phone, turned for the door. "Wait," he called after me. "Where are you going?" I paused in the doorway and turned around one last time. "I'm leaving," Diane scoffed, all smug and dismissive. "You can't just walk away from a marriage." I met her gaze, completely still. "Watch me." And then I walked out. It took 6 months to get the divorce finalized. Ethan pulled out every move in the book. Begging, guilt trips, even trying to flip the script and paint me as the one who overreacted. None of it worked. I didn't look back. Claire stayed in touch. She kept me updated on the aftermath I never asked for. Apparently, things imploded the minute I left. Ethan finally confronted his parents. Finally asked the questions he should have asked years ago. And it didn't go well. Gerald called him weak. Said I had manipulated him. Diane cried and swore I brainwashed him. Classic. And for the first time, Ethan saw them for what they really were. But for me, it didn't matter anymore. I was already gone. I moved back to Charleston for good. Got a new apartment. Reconnected with some old friends. Started putting my life back together one piece at a time. Months went by. Then, one night, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Ethan, I see it now."
I'm sorry.
I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because for the first time in years, I was free. I stood up slowly, slid my bag over my shoulder, and looked Ethan in the eye. "I'm not coming back." That shook him out of whatever fog he'd been in. "Wait. What?" he said, blinking like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "I'm done, Ethan." His eyes widened. "You're serious?" Claire let out a dry, short laugh. "Seriously, dude? You're just now catching up." Diane's voice pitched up, all panicked and dramatic. "This is absurd. You're going to throw away your marriage over a misunderstanding." I looked at her, tired, just bone-deep tired.
No, Diane.
"You threw it away. You and Gerald, with your twisted little games and your idea of what family is supposed to look like." Then I turned to Ethan. "And you? You just stood by and let it happen. Too scared, too weak to stand up for me." He reached for my arm, like some last-ditch effort to grab on before I slipped away completely, but I stepped back. "Wait. Just talk to me," he pleaded. I held up my hand.
No.
"That's all you ever do, talk. You make excuses. You let them steer the ship while you sit quietly in the back seat." I let the silence stretch just a second longer, then added, "But I'm done, Ethan. I'm done listening." I picked up my phone from the table and turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard his voice, shaky now. "Wait. Where are you going?" I paused in the doorway and glanced over my shoulder. "I'm leaving." Diane scoffed behind me, her voice thick with disbelief. "You can't just walk out of a marriage." I met her stare head-on, my face unreadable, calm. "Watch me." And with that, I turned and walked right out the door.